supporting the water treatment community since 1989. Choosing a blender should support and move your business forward. Qualichem collaborates closely with suppliers to develop innovative solutions and continuously seeks new technologies and raw materials. They've recently moved into a new headquarters facility with world-class laboratory space to accelerate product development and training. They offer comprehensive support from field training and sales assistance to lab services, so you can solve problems faster and win more business. With coverage across North America and internationally, Qualichem is the partner you need to stay ahead. To explore how Qualichem's innovation can propel your growth, visit scalinguph2o.com/Qualichem. Once again, that's scalinguph2o.com/Qualichem. At Qualichem, we know the blender matters. If your sales meetings feel like just another meeting, it may be time to raise your sales curve on purpose. Lauren Real knows that new sales is life to a water treatment company, and he helps teams build the skills and habits to make that happen. Using simple real-world case studies from water treatment and collaborative discussions, Lauren shows salespeople and managers how to manage opportunities, ask better questions, and move prospects to decisions. He offers sales training, keynote talks at sales meetings and conferences, and consulting specifically for water treatment companies. Lauren is available to speak at your next water treatment sales meeting or conference, or work directly with your team in a training or consulting role. And if you don't feel his session was useful, his speaking or consulting fee is 100% waived. Learn more by visiting scalinguph2o.com/realwater. Once again, that's scalinguph2o.com/realwater. Real sales training, real sales motivation, and real sales experience. That's Real Water. Welcome to the Scaling Up H2O podcast, the podcast where we scale up on knowledge so we don't scale up our systems. I'm Trace Blackmore, the host of the Scaling Up H2O podcast. And Nation, I am super excited to bring you today's interview. It's all about how different generations show up at work. And right now, we have a little bit of every generation showing up to the water treatment industry, and we all come from a different culture. We all communicate differently, and we all lead differently. All of that comes to a head in our industry. Sometimes we get it right, sometimes we get it wrong, but today's interview is going to help us understand what we need to know so we can continue to get it right all the time. But before we get there, I do want to talk about a few things. One, today is June 5th, and that is World Environment Day. And it's a reminder that everything we do in the industrial water treatment industry connects back to protecting the environments and communities that we all serve. Today is a perfect day to take time to think about all of our cooling towers, our boilers, our closed loops, and how all of them are part of a much bigger environmental story. So as you listen today, I invite you to think about the role you play in safeguarding reliable water treatment systems and the environment around those systems. Everything we do makes an impact, and that's why I absolutely love the industrial water treatment industry. Now, if you want to keep sharpening your skills, mark your calendar for some big 2026 upcoming events where water and facilities come together. WEFTEC 2026 in New Orleans is taking place September 26th through 30th. We're going to have all the information about that show on our events page. And while you're there, check out the 2026 ASHI Healthcare Facilities Innovation Conference. That's going to take place August 2nd through 5th in Minneapolis. And then finally, the 4th Annual Water Efficiency and Conservation Symposium, taking place at Chicago's Gleacher Center, August 4th through 6th. And we're going to have those 3 events, all the details that you need by going to scalinguph2o.com, heading over to our events page, and you will see those 3 as well as every single show that we know of. Now, you might be asking, how do they know all this stuff? Well, we've done extensive searches to try to find the shows that best fit this industry and the listeners of this podcast. But we know that's no small task. We know we have some gaps in there. So if you uncover one of those gaps, please let us know what show we need to add to our calendar, because I know firsthand how hard it is to drive from account to account and try to keep up with all the other things that are going on within our industry. And we here at the Scaling Up H2O podcast want to make that as easy as possible for you to stay in the know and know where you need to go. Speaking of somebody who's always in the know is our friend James McDonald, and here is a new installment of everybody's favorite game show, Words of Water with James.
Hello and welcome to Words of Water with James, the industrial water game show where I give you the definition and you get to guess the word or phrase being defined. Will you rise to the top or get blown down to try your luck another day? There's only one way to find out on Words of Water with James. Today's definition is an ion with a net negative charge, formed when an atom or molecule gains 1 or more electrons. Examples include bicarbonate, chloride, and sulfate. Can you guess the word or phrase? The answer is anion. Okay, for those who got it correct, step to the right. For those who got it wrong, please step to the left. Clean up on aisle 3. I'm James McDonald, and I look forward to seeing you next time on Words of Water with James.
Well, thank you, James. And if you need to catch up on any Words of Water with James, please go over to scalinguph2o.com. We've got all of those listed on our show notes pages, so you don't want to get behind with all the fun quizzes that James has each and every week trying to make us better industrial water treaters. So we're going to make that as easy as possible by putting them all on our webpage. Speaking of our website, we have so many resources now. We have a discussion guide for each and every episode. We have quizzes that you can take for episodes. We have so much. And if you're not taking advantage of all the things that we have on the website, you're only getting a fraction of what you could get from each and every episode. I know a lot of companies that before their company meeting, they will all listen to an episode and answer one of our discussion guides. What a great conversation starter, and we've done all the heavy lifting so you don't have to think of questions for your team. You can get started right with the conversation and make sure that you are increasing the knowledge of everybody on board. Nation, on the onset, I mentioned how excited I was about this interview, and I'm excited because I know how much it's helped me. I know that I grew up and I'm a Gen Xer. And because I'm a Gen Xer, I was the latchkey kid and I had all the things growing up in the 80s and early 90s that made my growing up culture the way that it was. And then Every so many years, we have a new generation coming up, and we expect them to react and respond the same ways that we do, but they grew up differently. Now, look at my father's generation, the baby boomers, and it's very different from how I grew up and how the Gen Zers grew up. So, all of these different generations working together, and nobody's understanding each other. And of course, one of my favorite conversations is always when we talk about communication. And when we have better information, we can communicate better because we understand the why behind why people are interpreting our words in a particular way. Nation, you're going to get that very thing from this interview. Here it is. My lab partner today is workplace resilience expert Tiffany Wintzroot, founder of Resilient Roots. Tiffany, welcome to the Scaling Up H2O podcast.
Hey, Trace. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
I am excited to have this conversation. We started this conversation at AWT at their annual conference, and what a great panel. I know we're going to talk about that experience. Before we do, though, do you mind introducing yourself to the Scaling Up Nation?
Sure. Like you said, Tiffany Wintzroot, and I served in the United States Marine Corps. And after that, I entered the world of therapy and became a mental health counselor. And somewhere along that journey, I worked in a lot of really high intensity fields. And that led me to a desire to support people who are working in corporations. And I set out to do this thing. And my parents at first said, "This is madness. No one's going to hire you." And it turns out they do. And so I have a very diverse experience and background that lends me to have a lot of compassion and understanding for individuals. And I like to bring those resources to work to help overcome challenges like communication, empathy, understanding, range of different things.
Well, first off, let me say thank you for your service. And I have to ask, Marines to helping people get along better, tell me how that happens.
Yeah, I always say, I'm not your average therapist. I joined the Marine Corps and I was very young when the war happened, the second Iraq war, and I volunteered to go. I actually kind of begged to go. And at the time, my senior officer was a Vietnam veteran, and he said, if you go, it can change you. And at the time, I didn't really understand what he meant. But when I came home, I understood. And I found that I had post-traumatic stress disorder. So I went through my own therapy, changed my life, and I realized I'm strong enough to do this. And we really need people who have that background, because I didn't want to break a civilian. I didn't want to talk to a civilian. And so I thought, well, I have the military background. I'm very interested in psychology and helping. And that just seemed to be my place. I actually intended to work with veterans. And instead, I primarily work in tech, gaming, and cybersecurity.
How did that happen?
That is a weird story. People ask me, like, how do I do what you do? I was doing public speaking and I responded to a Facebook post. Not going to lie, like it was a Facebook post that someone said, "Would you do this presentation?" It took off. One of my first presentations was a fully produced event with Xbox. And it was this huge event, very big audience. And that just sort of landed me in the world of tech. And I fit well there. I wouldn't have guessed that, but they're very direct, very, strong people. And then I found myself working with Xbox for several years. And now I work with all different folks in tech and gaming, and now water treatment and animal welfare. I say anywhere that people stand in the fire, I belong. So anyone doing difficult work is where I like to be.
Now, specifically at AWT, we were talking about the different generations. Is that what you specialize in?
This is a weird part about what I do, is that corporations will come to me and say, "I have this problem, can you solve it?" And as long as it's in my wheelhouse, meaning I've studied it and I can easily create some content for you, I will probably do that. Now, I want to say my wheelhouse is sort of narrow, right? I'm not going to talk to you about water treatment, actually. I'm not going to be good at that. But this ask actually came to me from a large tech corporation that wanted me to create a series of trainings for their executive leadership team. And we did this meeting to discuss what their needs were and what they wanted. And at the end of the conversation, their final ask was, "Can you help us understand that generation?" And I was talking to someone who's a baby boomer, and I kind of laughed and I said, "Would you be talking about Gen Z?" And they said, "Yeah, we have all these young kids and we don't know what to do with them. We don't know how to communicate. We have all these conflicts, and we would really love some tools. And it was a great question. And because I've studied developmental psychology for, 15 years, and I work with people at all ages and stages, I think I have a perspective and understanding that most people don't. And that allows me to work with any age, any group of individuals. And so then I went on this huge nerdy deep dive, and I created for each generation, from silent generation all the way through Gen Z. I went and looked at all of the impactful events that occurred during their timeline. And then I made an actual physical timeline for each generation. And that just sparked a big sea of curiosity. So I've been running this workshop and presentations in various forms for probably about 5 years now. So I'm not sure I would call myself an expert. That feels like I still have a lot to learn, but I love this conversation, and I've poured a tremendous amount of time into it. Every time I get to talk about it, I go do more research. I do, more depth of understanding. And when I get opportunities like the panel, or when I get to host in-person workshops, I see the content come to life, and I see the impact it has, and I gain understanding from each one. So at this point, I've done this conversation in full day in-person workshops. We held an AWT webinar last January, and so it was about an hour and a half talk. And then that led to the panel. So this has become something that I'm really passionate about. Eventually, I'd like to write a book about this.
Tiffany, so we can all join in the conversation. Can you help us understand all the generations, where they stop, when they start, what significant events happened that shaped those generations, so we can start having a conversation about the generations?
Yeah. And so we actually probably should start with a question that my husband asked me. So when I do my presentations, I usually show him what I'm working on, and then he'll ask me questions that help me develop it. And so I went through this whole presentation with him, and at the end, he says to me, "What is a generation?" And I laughed. I was like, "Oh, I don't know. I should definitely have that." And so I think we should probably start there and say, a generation is sort of a made up period of time, but we're defining the formative years of individuals who are going through life at about the same time. And so this is about the first, 20 to 30 years of life. We're going from birth into when they're birthing the next generation. And so it's very arbitrary. So as I say, these days and times, I want all of us to know that a lot of us are on the cusp. So before the talk, you and I acknowledge that we're both Gen X. I'm not technically Gen X. I'm technically a millennial. When I found that out, when I made this presentation, I died a little. I'm not going to lie. Millennials are great. But I was like, I'm a millennial? And honestly, I don't align with any of it, because I was born in 1982 and the cutoff for Gen X is 1980. So I align with Gen X's music and message, and I did not grow up with the internet or cell phones. And so I just want to call that out, that you may be on the cusp and you may align more with one or the other. But the roughly agreed upon dates are: silent generation is 1928 to 1945. Baby boomers is 1946 to 1964. Gen X picks up 1965 to 1980. Millennials 1981 to 1996. Gen Z 1997 to 2012. And we're currently grazing Gen Alpha. So that would be 2013 to, well, I don't know that math yet, but 30 years from now.
That's a lot of generations. And with the exception of Gen Alpha, all the other generations are now working together. How does that work?
Well, so it's interesting. I start my timeline with the silent generation, who's largely retired at this point, right? They're 80 to 100 right now. And I actually was hired to do this with another organization, and they said, "We don't care about the silent generation. We care about Gen Alpha." And I kind of tried to push back gently. And then I just said, "Okay, that's what you want." And I think they realized the flaw in this problem was that Gen Alpha is not at work yet. They're at school. So we're not really interfacing with them. I present silent generation because they informed and influenced baby boomers, who largely created the systems that we live and work in now. The corporations, the government, they are sort of our current founders. And I am aware that there is US and world history way before that, but it does sort of seem to turn over. So what we're seeing right now is baby boomers are usually senior leadership. They're more senior in their career. And then there's the Gen X folks like us, which, the baby boomer generation was really coming out of a generation that was focused on survival. And the silent generation was all about scarcity, right? They saw World War II. They saw the Great Depression. They literally had to give their children to orphanages because there wasn't enough food. And, we laugh about grandma's sour cream container, but this is a really good example of what I'm talking about. If you lived through the Great Depression where you almost didn't have enough food to feed your child, absolutely you're not buying Tupperware. I actually don't know if Tupperware existed. But now we don't have to tease them. We go, oh, this is evidence of an experience you went through and the values that you gain through that, the teachings, what's important to you. And so Silent Generation said, it's important to have a job. Like the bar was very low and they were very loyalist, right? They went through this world war, which created this huge boom of patriotism in the United States. I also want to call out that I am speaking from a US centric perspective, a Gen X perspective, and I am a female. And so these things are relevant because I do want to say that there are limitations in the timelines I present. I can't speak to every generation with authenticity. I can't speak from every cultural lens. And so I do just want to make that known that it is a bit of a narrow lens we're going to be able to discuss today. Someday I want 12 timelines. So anyways, coming back to your question, baby boomers come into the world and they're told, work hard, stay with a company and make money. Stability is what you're after. And so they carry that and they say, okay, I'm going to stay here for 30 years, work hard, 9 to 5. We had a very traditional life. And then something really wild happened during Gen X's lifestyle. There was a whole bunch of workforce rules that changed and mass layoffs happened. There was a big tech boom and bust, and corporations were laying off employees left and right. So Gen X said, wait a minute, you've been telling us our whole life to just find a company and stay there for 30 years. You didn't tell us they can fire us. And so Gen X is actually the biggest entrepreneurial generation. And I think it's largely because they saw corporations really make their lives difficult. And they saw that safety wasn't there. They said, no way, build your own. I know personally, I watched my parents go through Boeing. My mom was laid off a few times. And every time I thought, wow, you could give everything to this company and they don't care about you. And so Gen X said, no, we need different. We are a bit angry at the establishment. Gen X is a bit of a fighty, angry generation. Like, have you ever compared our music to everybody else's, Trace?
I am a grunge fan. That is
Yep.
what I grew up on.
Yep. Grunge and rap. Like we were an angry generation. And so, we were very independent, right? They call us the latchkey kids, be home when the lampposts come on. And so we were out there doing things on our own. We're the first generation that really had single parenting and both parents working in the household. Now in comes the millennial and we start to realize, wait a minute, we shouldn't have abandoned our children. This poor Gen X generation fending for themselves, this isn't good. And so then the pendulum swung and the millennials got the participation trophies, which we often make a joke about, but that impacted them quite differently than us. Right. And that's why I don't align. I never got a participation trophy, Trace. Like you work hard and maybe you get something. And so the millennials came in and they said, oh, just because I show up, I ought to get something. And so we start to see this shift into individualism even more. So Gen X is very individualistic, down with the man. And now millennials start holding it quite differently. And they start expecting a company to care about them, which is very new. Gen X knew companies wouldn't care about them. Baby boomers said, I don't care if you care about me, just pay me. And millennials say, wait a minute, I don't want to hate my life. And I want you to care. And then we pass that on to Gen Z, who is a very unique generation. And I'd love to make sure we give them enough time. But their experience has been unlike any generation in the history of our world. And now they say, this is awful. And I am really struggling. I need support. I need someone who is not authoritarian, but actually cares about me. I need you to have emotional literacy. Can you imagine? Baby boomers didn't even talk about emotions at work, right? Keep your feelings at home, make work your favorite. And now we have a generation that says, all of me needs to come to work. I'm going to be individual and unique, and I need you to accommodate that. And that is one of the biggest divides that I see, is emotional awareness, expectations from leadership, and the individuality. It's very different.
My son is in the Gen Z population. I am a Gen Xer, as you pointed out. You also pointed out on the panel, the further we get removed, the more misunderstandings that we have. But I have to say that I misunderstand so many things that my son does. If I call somebody sir or ma'am, he will correct me and say, no, absolutely, you can. That's rude. That wasn't rude that was respectful when I grew up. So I'm learning lots of new things from my son. But you mentioned it is very much about emotions. It's all of me coming to work, and they're fine talking about emotions. You and I, when we grew up, we really didn't talk about emotions. We dealt with things, we got things done. Now, I will say my son is not weak by any stretch of that word, but his generation has been referred to as weak because they bring emotions into it. How do we straighten that out?
Well, I think that this idea that emotions are weak is a really good remnant from the silent generation, baby boomers, and even our generation, right? Because we were told, take your feelings, shove them to the depths of your soul, and go to work. And we definitely saw, crying was weakness. There's a whole bunch of, phrases coming out of that time about what happens if you have emotions. And so, first and foremost, I just want to call that out and say that's a generational difference. That was a perspective and an experience that was held and is no longer held. And so we look at this generation who's doing something different and we say, oh, that's weird. That's wrong. We judge it. And in fact, I would argue, same as you, that this generation is incredibly emotionally literate. That my son, the things he brings to the table, I just look at him and I tell him sometimes, you are so much wiser at 21. Actually, today's his 21st birthday. You are so much wiser at 21 than I think I have been my whole life. And so we need to stop prizing strength first and foremost. And we need to understand that emotions are very difficult to face. To feel your feelings, to name them, to process them, that's hard. And so we need to overcome that and start understanding. I think our lens has been wrong. I think it's been very harmful for us to say that emotions are weakness. And so we need to let that go. I also want to make room that Gen Z is, on my slide, I call them the anxious and afraid generation. And that's because they do have the highest rates of anxiety, depression, and we're also seeing the lowest ages of suicide and highest rates of suicide. So we are seeing some things in Gen Z where they're struggling. I would have a hard time saying it is because they're not resilient. I would say they're growing up in a world that is incredibly difficult to be in, and they are very aware of it, very aware.
Well, in their formative years, they spent it at home in lockdown. They experienced COVID. That was seventh grade for my son. That had to have been a huge factor in the things that we're experiencing now.
Yeah, I think that was a big part. And, again, if I bring in my lens of developmental psychology, this is a good example. So I ask you, Trace, what was it like for you during COVID?
COVID was very scary. You didn't know if you were going to open your business. We didn't know what was going on. Water treaters were deemed, what was the term that they use? Essential business. So we all did work and we actually did very well during COVID, but we didn't know that during the time. There was no playbook for that. But me being a Gen Xer, shoved those emotions down. Yes, I'm really nervous and scared, but I'm going to come to work. I'm going to lead my people and we're going to get stuff done. And we did. But we didn't talk a lot about emotions during that time, I will admit.
No, we didn't. And I was in leadership at the time. I was the director of two behavioral health facilities. So I was on a plane every week going between Tacoma, Washington, Spokane, Washington. And we faced it. We were out in the world. We were seeing people who were scared and angry. And we also had agency. We also had context and awareness. We've seen bad things happen and we've overcome them. We sort of know that. And now we drop into Gen Z to answer your question. They were at home completely isolated. And so in some ways, I talked to my son, he goes, COVID was awesome. I just stayed at home, played video games with my friends all the time. And I thought, oh, wow, your lens was so different. I was facing the public where they were scared, they were angry, they were yelling at me. It was very uncomfortable. I mean, being in healthcare, no, thank you. That was difficult. And then I thought, sure, yeah, you just hung out with your friends. But it shaped his communication profoundly because my communication style, my social skills had already been established. According to developmental psychology, it's adolescence where we're forming our identity and our social connections. That's the primary goal of adolescence. Who am I? And my friends are defining that. So we took them out of that and we said, you're not going to learn how to talk directly to adults. Now adults are scary. They should have been learning that face to face, talking to the principal, talking to their teachers, interfacing with adults, gaining those social skills. And so now they lack that. And a lot of them have social anxiety because they also had the ability to send a text and they could type it and then reword it and type it and reword it. And now this whole live communication is horrifying because when you say it, it's just out. If you said a dumb thing, you said a dumb thing. And they didn't learn to overcome that. So it really shaped their social interactions, their communication interactions with their peers, with adults. And that's part of why they're all online. I'm sure a lot of Gen Z people with Gen Z kids are going to say, my kid doesn't pick up the phone. Of course, your kid doesn't pick up the phone. They never did that. They got on the computer.
Well, not only that, it's rude if I don't text him first before I call him.
Yes, they're online. Their communication is happening in apps, right? They're on Snapchat, they're on Discord, they're in Steam. Their text messaging is archaic. Phone calls are prehistoric.
Tiffany, let me ask you. So, your son said it was awesome. I got to hang out with my friends. When I hear that, it's like you weren't hanging out with your friends. They weren't there. It was a long distance relationship almost. So we've redefined what socializing with our friends are based on that.
Yeah. And you and I define our socialization by our developmental experiences. I was outside. I was riding my bike, getting dirty, climbing trees, falling out of trees, to get your friends. I remember in middle school, I used to race BMX bikes. And in the morning, in the summertime, we'd wake up and we'd sort of do like you see in the Sandlot, right? You get on your bike and then you go to your friend Kyle's house, you pick up Kyle, and then you go over to Corey's house and you pick up Corey. And we would do this whole thing and we would traverse miles of town, miles. And now they don't do that. And so they're also referred to sometimes as the indoor generation. And for us, socialization is face to face. It's, live. And for them, it's playing video games. They didn't have the ability to go play with their friends outside. And if we build on that, if we go back to the millennials, that was the helicopter parent generation. Parents became very aware of how dangerous the world is. You and I don't know why my parents let me traverse 20 miles a day on a bike. I'd wake up in the morning, I'd be home by dinner, and nobody knows what I did in between. Could you imagine millennials being able to do that?
Yeah, I could track my son through his entire ages. I knew exactly where he was. No, I could not imagine allowing him to do what my parents allowed me to do.
And yet part of me wishes we would, because we've taught them that the world is a bit scary and that it's best to stay inside.
So now they're joining the workforce and they have different priorities. And I say they, the Gen Z generation. They're talking about emotions. They're dealing with emotions. You already said that they're the most anxious of the generations. And now you have people that have been taught to suppress all emotions and just get things done by all means. So we're not coming in with the same language. No wonder we're getting confused when we all come together at work. I know a lot of people are working with you to try to solve that problem. That was essentially what the panel was at AWT. What are some things that you can share, maybe that we learned from the panel? And was there anything unique about being in the industrial water industry and the different generations? Share some expertise so we can get along a little bit better in our places of business.
Yeah. And after that, I have a question for you too. So I'm going to pin that. But sure, AWT was different. Largely, it is a whole lot of baby boomers and Gen X individuals who are running companies. And largely they're men. It is a male dominated field. And so, I don't want to get too gendered here. And also there are some, gender differences that we've seen throughout the ages. And so if you have a male dominated field who are primarily senior males, emotions are not a thing. Gen X baby boomers are the hustle generation. And it was really interesting in the panel that the baby boomer, when I asked, what's your definition of hard work? He said, I put in a lot of hours. And then I asked Gen X, what's your definition of hard work? I put in a lot of hours. Millennials, what's your definition of hard work? Well, I get the job done and I'm proud of it. Gen Z, what's your definition of hard work? And actually during the pre-interviews, so I interviewed folks before and just kind of gathered my questions. The person who was supposed to be Gen Z said, hard work? And I said, sure. Like, how would you define whether or not you put in hard work? Like, at the end of the day, I worked hard. How do you know you did that? And so it took a little coaching for me to even get that answer. And they said, it's when the work that I've done aligns with my skills and my passions, and I feel good about what I did. That's a very different metric, very different metric. And so we're coming to the table with a very different vocabulary, language, and expectation. And then the baby boomers and Gen X are setting the culture. Gen Z is coming in and going, wait, But I don't want to do that. That doesn't feel good. That doesn't feel ethical. And so we do see that very big gap right there. In the water treatment industry, I did encounter some younger folks. It was difficult to find some Gen Z. I won't lie. There was a bunch of Gen X people, but it was difficult to find a Gen Z. And so I think you are all tasked with that goal of stepping outside of your lens, getting curious about other lenses, and then seeing them as strengths instead of weaknesses. Different doesn't mean wrong. If I could land anything in my life, I think that's probably one of the most important things. Different doesn't mean wrong. And so if you can see this younger generation as having different needs, skills, and abilities, and we get curious about it, they're going to help you adapt. Because honestly, water treatment is going to struggle to carry on if we don't start building that younger generation. We're seeing all these people retiring, and I understand a very large amount of your workforce is set to retire in the next like 5-10 years.
Absolutely, yeah.
That's going to be a big problem. I also think that because an older generation, it's a lot of families handing down, that there's some technology places for y'all to grow. And guess who can do that for you? Gen Z. You're going to have to figure out how to market to them. You're going to have to figure out how to market to them as customers and also employees. And so if you go through the traditional routes, you're probably not going to find them. They are really looking for a company that is going to accept all of them and that has values, which is so difficult for a company. When I work with Gen Z, I say a company is a piece of paper. It doesn't have values. But that's a big difference, is they want a company to be values driven, and they need to align it, and they will walk on a job. They do not care as much about the money. Like the American dream is shot. So they're like, no, I'm not going to slave for anything. I will work somewhere that feels good, that I'm respected, that I'm valued, or I won't be here. And so I think those are some very big pieces for water treatment to start looking at and problem solving. How do I speak to a generation that needs something we've never needed?
I don't remember the question that I was answering, but I represented Gen X, and I said, I want to go on record that the period deserves two spaces behind it. And people stood up and cheered and laughed. And then Abby, our representative Gen Z, she made a comment about taking a mental health day. And she also got laughter, but for a very different reason. Can you help us unpack that?
Yeah, that's not specific to Gen Z. That's been happening always, always. I mean, I'm certain that there was a time when your parents thought that you were sort of ridiculous, idealistic. Part of that is because that's their developmental stage. They are idealistic. They don't understand the ways of the world fully. But that doesn't mean they don't understand anything. And so we tend to paint with very broad strokes, saying, oh, young things, you don't get it. Oh, they do. They get a lot. They just might not get what you get. And so because they look different and because they look young, we automatically assume that they are dumb, that they are not mature. And I don't think that's the case at all. When I talked to Abby, she said it was really frustrating that nobody took her seriously. She's a very intelligent young woman. And reality is they're all just going through college. They might actually, I don't know, be smarter than us in some ways. I forgot most of my college education at this point. And so we need to stop that idea that because you're young, you don't have anything to offer. They do. They really do. I'm sure you've had some great conversations with your son. I definitely have with mine, where I appreciate his perspective and his advice, and I'm often surprised by it. But we're never going to understand that if we automatically assume that they are ignorant, that they are immature, that they are selfish. And so we really need to watch our judgment of all generations. I made a joke about millennials. Yeah, and I apologize for that when I made on the panel. I actually checked out with the millennials, like, did I offend you? And so I make that joke of like, oh, your participation trophies, because that's how it felt. And also I can step into empathy and say, your experience was different because we wanted you to have a better life. That's all.
Well, we were the ones that gave those trophies.
Yes, that's a really important part, Trace. When I was working with the corporations, the first time I did this presentation, it was virtual, and they all had their cameras off. And I said to them, I'm so glad your cameras are off. I don't want to see your face when I say what I'm about to say next. And then boop, 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 cameras start turning on. And I said, right, Gen Z, you're having a really hard time with them. How old are your children? And you can see it take a minute. They do the math. And I said, yep, you're their parents. You raise them. You need to remember why you raised them to be emotionally intelligent. Why did you tell them that who they are matters? It worked really well at home because you wanted a child who was healthy, who was comfortable in their own skin instead of feeling embarrassed and shamed like so many other generations did. You wanted them to have better. And then they showed up at work and it's difficult. And all their faces were like, yes, that's a great point. So at work, it irritates us because we expect everyone to follow the same culture and standards that have been set. And really, I'd like us to step into wondering, why is this generation the way it is? We shaped them. We did it on purpose, and now we have to accommodate them at work.
Before we jump back into our discussion, we're going to take a quick break to hear from one of our sponsors. Hey there, Scaling Up Nation, it's Trace Blackmore, and today I want to talk about a powerful ally in the fight against biofilm, AMSA. Here's the bottom line. Biocides alone just aren't enough to control biofilm. That's why AMSA's R&D team designed BCP products to work alongside biocides to create an effective biofilm control program. Whether you're dealing with oxidizing or non-oxidizing biocides, AMSA products are compatible and enhance their performance, helping to keep your system under control. But that's not all. AMSA BCP products are versatile. They can be used for aggressive offline cleaning, gradual online cleaning, or as part of a regular water treatment program to keep your cooling water systems clean long-term. Whether you're dosing in a slug-based or continuous program, AMSA has you covered. AMSA products are your secret weapon in systems prone to fouling, like those with high ammonia levels, hydrocarbon contamination, or reclaim water. Because as we all know, AMSA's chemistry helps clean it up and keep it clean. Scaling Up Nation, if you're ready to take your biofilm control program to the next level, head over to scalinguph2o.com/AMSA to learn more about their innovative biofilm control program solutions. Once again, that's scalinguph2o.com/AMSA. Trust me, your cooling water systems will thank you. Let's dive back in right where we left off. One of your strategies is creating social contracts. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so sometimes I work with organizations, and I like to do it on the front end and then revisit it, annually. And a social contract is an agreed set of values and behaviors and expectations. And the conversation alone is really great. You can do this on your own. You can hire a facilitator. There's lots of facilitators that will come in and do this. And we start to ask the team things like, how do you prefer to communicate? What are the values you all hold? And you'll see very different values coming out of different generations. I actually think that's the biggest sticking point, is that they have different values. And so we say, what do you value? And then what does it look like? And so we value honesty. Okay, what is that going to look like? And so we identify the values of the organization that are shared, and then we list out the behaviors that we're going to do, how we're going to hold ourselves accountable. And that way we all have a shared understanding of how we're going to show up at work. We can talk about things like communication. How do we want to communicate? And a baby boomer will probably say, I'd like a meeting, pick up the phone. And a Gen Z is probably going to say, that's going to produce a ton of anxiety. I don't want to do that. And then we can define, we say, okay, how about communication that is very quick and easy can be done via Slack. But if we have to have a big talk that requires a lot of brainstorming and maybe more motion, let's do that in person. We can negotiate. And that way, Gen Z can understand why the baby boomers and Gen X want to get on an actual call, see your face. And we can also maybe understand why they don't want to do that all the time. And so we get to have these conversations. We really see a lot of sticking points around communication, feedback, how and when we're going to give that feedback, what we need from our leadership and what leadership needs from us. So we can go over those, main sticking points, identify our values, and then we come out with this expectation for everyone. And then we keep aligning to it. It has to be a living document. A lot of times we roll these fluffy things out and then they die. Well, that's not good for anybody. You just wasted your time and money. But if we say, okay, because of the social contract, I'm going to do X, even though it's difficult, then it becomes a living thing in your culture. And over time, you're going to have to revisit it because new people come, new people go, things evolve. The goal is really to open this conversation to identify what we all need to feel good at work and to be productive and effective at work.
Is mentorship part of that?
Yes. I would love if organizations would do cross mentorship between different generations. And I understand that there's HR laws. I told everyone that I was served in Iraq War and I was born in 1982. I don't care. I've never really cared. I'll probably tell you my age as long as I live. A lot of people don't love that game, Trace. So you don't have to say, how old are you? You could say, are you more senior in your career? versus junior in your career. And they're going to sort out reasonably there, right? And so we could also ask, what are the skills that you bring to the table? And how do we do a skill matching? There's one organization I'm working with that created an AI agent that is for networking. And so you would voluntarily join and you would put your information in this agent. And then if someone else is looking for mentorship, they could find that. And so we would have someone self disclose, I'm of the baby boomer generation and my skill set is in, I don't know, Outlook organization, which I say that because it's really funny how we understand that, but so many different generations do not understand email. So we could say, this is a thing I'm struggling with. Is there anyone available to mentor me on this? But what we want to start creating is this conversation between different people at different levels of the company, different seasons in their career, and different generations. Because if we just get together, we have the same skill set, same perspectives ish. But the farther apart we go, if we can create the dialogue, then Gen Z can teach us about Slack. They can teach us about Discord or Steam. I mean, I'm probably not going to use Steam at work. It's a video gaming platform, but they can teach us some really innovative ways to communicate and to work that are probably faster and more efficient than baby boomers. And so that's what I would love to see. And however your organization wants to set that up, there's tons of things. There's, Donut is an app that you can put in your corporation where you just set up for coffee. I would encourage that to be a thing that is common and reinforced. That we're making time out of our day. We talk about it. We bring things to the table, an outcome of our mentorship. I know within the water treatment industry, that is the thing that's happening. Actually, Abby is mentoring with another person. I think it's Paula. I'm probably saying her name wrong.
Paul Genet, yes.
Thank you. And so I know they're doing some mentorship, and I just think that's lovely. Paula is very interested in Abby's perspectives, and in turn, Abby's appreciating some mentorship from someone who's been in the field for a while. So I would encourage people to get curious and to reach out for it. A lot of Gen Z is pretty anxious about that. So if we can initiate that from the senior generations, that's probably going to be better. They're probably not going to come to the table and say, I'd like mentorship from you, because honestly, they just think we're old people.
Well, speaking of that, you alluded to a big issue that we've got going on in our industry. In the next 5 to 10 years, all of our boomers are going to be retiring. And the way it is, on the most part right now, is we're going to lose so much information. How do we do exactly what you just said and retain this information and also make it fun for the retiring boomers in the process?
Yeah. And meaningful. Some of these people have spent their whole life building this company, and they're, their parents' side, right? This is very important to people. And so we do need to start building that bench. We need to be passing on this information and that guidance. And so if you are nearing retirement, I would really start looking at not just Gen X, but Gen Z. Sure, Gen X is coming up as leadership right now. We're getting to we've largely taken over politics, and we're going to be taking over the corporation soon. But we shouldn't just stop there, because Gen X has been in the industry with us. They've got those tools. Who's going to run this company in 3 generations? And wouldn't it be beautiful if they can get your understanding? I took a class, I was at a conference, and I took 2 full days of classes from this man. His name's Dr. Joe Sullivan, and he's going to retire soon. And he is a world-renowned expert in his field. And I thought to myself, I will never have the opportunity to hear him speak again. And the reason he continues to speak is because he knows when he goes, all of his knowledge and wisdom and passion goes as well. And so that's real. If we can start recording information, if we can start having those conversations with junior employees, then they're going to be able to pass that on. Don't just stop with Gen X. Have meetings, have conversations, have recorded trainings, and on all things, on how to build relationships. Most of AWT is relationships. Yes, you need to understand water treatment. There are so many things about your corporations that I do not understand. Walking the floor at the AWT conference, I realized you guys are very, very intelligent chemists and whatnot. So sure, give them the practical knowledge, but give them more. Why is a phone call important in our industry? How do you do that? How do you pick up the phone and talk to someone you've never talked to? They need those skills. So I'm challenging Gen X and baby boomers to try to learn the skills that really these young folks are going to need and teach it to them while learning from them. They're not going to like it if we just call them and tell them that we have all the answers. We need to give it to them. If we can connect it to a why, a purpose, they're going to hear us more as well. I'm investing in you, not because I want my company to succeed, because they don't care. I'm investing in you because I want you to have a successful and fulfilling career. That's a much better message for leadership to be landing right now.
With all the companies that you've worked with, is there some similarities, something that you want pretty much everybody listening to start doing and stop doing?
Yes, stop judging. Judgment kills curiosity, and it's normal. Our brain judges. That's real. Our brain is designed to keep us alive, and so it's constantly looking at things in our environment and saying, "Do I know what that is?" And if it doesn't know what it is, the brain sends up a flag and goes, "Oop, that's different. That's other. Is it bad?" That's just categorically how the brain takes in information. So when I see someone of a different generation with a different way of speaking or different way of communicating, and I mean that like the method of communication, I automatically go, oh, that's bad. That's weird. And instead, I want you to step into curiosity and say, why would they do that? What happened in their life that shaped them to be this person who wants this thing? For example, my son said to me one time, you Gen X people take 1,000 photographs and they don't like their photograph taken in Gen Z. That's a really good moment. We could totally judge that, right? My son could judge me as like this old Gen X kid who just wants a bunch of photos. And I could look at him as this like disrespectful person who won't ever let his mom take a photo. But if we stop being judgy and we say, why? Well, I can tell you. And I did tell him. I said, the reason we take 1,000 photos is because when we were growing up, you had to have a camera, physical camera with you. You would take your pictures, you would take them down to Walgreens or Rite Aid. You drop this off, wait 3 weeks, pay $15, and find out that every photo is ruined. And this idea
Facts.
that I can take a photo right now and have it is so novel. There's so many moments in our lives that we didn't get to keep. And now, oh my gosh, I remember. Do you remember getting your first camera phone? It was all grainy and terrible,
I do remember that.
but it was magic. I'm like, I have a phone with a camera everywhere. And so it is novel to us and exciting. On their end, why do they hate having their photo taken? Because it can be used against them, because it's going to go up
Mm.
on social media where they're heavily judged for their appearance and they would rather not. So they take a lot more photos without their face or with funny faces because they live in a world of social judgment. They look different than we did, Trace. When we were kids, we were like just kids. These kids are expected to be like celebrities or they will be totally bullied. And so we go, ooh, okay, what if we don't judge? What if we get curious? And that would be the biggest landing I would love. I would love a conversation where instead of judging it, distancing ourselves and creating these conflicts, we say, could you help me understand why that's important to you? Teach me about what shaped that perspective for you. And then maybe we can negotiate. Son, give me a photo. I won't take 1,000.
I never thought about that. Now, my wife takes more photos than I do, but Hayden cannot stand having his photo taken, and I've never really thought about it like that. But now that you've said that, I look at it totally different. And I have understanding, and I want to ask him more questions about that. And it actually makes me think about our high school experiences where when you and I went to high school and something happened that embarrassed us, we hoped that the few people that saw it wouldn't tell other people. Well, the Gen Zers, there were 15 videos that went on social media. Not only the entire school saw it, the whole county saw it. And now they've got to live with that. I can't imagine that kind of pressure.
Yeah. If that was real, you would probably put way less out in the world. And so we really, that's the whole conversation that I want us to step into. My stepdaughter one day texted me and she said, we're watching Top Gun. This is a terrible movie. Why do you people love it so much? And I laughed and I said, well, because Tom Cruise takes his shirt off. And then she's like, yeah, but he's like an old guy. And I thought, oh man, it's happening right here. And I said to her, so let's go back in time. Top Gun came out during the Cold War, which is when we were very patriotic. We were very, big into America, big into the military. G.I. Joe is on TV. This is like a lot of Rambo, right? Like how many movies are happening at this time about this genre? Next up, we didn't know that Tom Cruise was like kind of a nut job. I don't know if you can put that on the podcast or not, but like there it
I
is.
think it's okay.
Okay. We thought he was like the sexiest man ever. He is a superstar hunk hot guy. And so he's the it guy in this show about the military where he's, this big buff dude. And also it's like a bromance. It's got feelings. It's got love. It's got everything. And she says, yeah, but like the videos, like the videography is like trash. I said, oh, my dear sweet friend, do you know that I believe Top Gun came out in 1986 and the same year Labyrinth came out? Did you ever see that movie with David Bowie?
I absolutely have, yes.
Okay,
And I love that movie. And I thought the special effects at the time were fantastic. Not so much now.
right? And so, actually, in the beginning of Labyrinth, when the owl flies, that is the first CGI animal ever on video.
I didn't know that.
That's when Top Gun was made. And so I said to her, this was mind blowing. Okay. Video of planes in the air. We couldn't do that. And so I kind of walked her through why was this magic? And I said, we also had to go to the movie theater. And then we had to get it from Blockbuster and watch it on VHS with our family all around the one TV that we have.
And
So
rewind it or you got charged a fee.
Be kind, rewind. These kids don't even know about that. And so she went, oh, okay. And so I had like a moment where I could drop her into 1986 and say, this is why we love Top Gun. And then I landed with but it's not my favorite movie. I'm just telling you why people like it. So that's the whole conversation that I really want us to have is, can we do that exercise? Can we step into the life of someone else and go, what was it like to see it through your eyes at the age you were when it happened? And that, if we circle back to COVID, it is a very different impact if I am 5 or 15 or 45, because I have different context, agency, maturity, and connections. And so we really, people point that out on the timelines. They'll say, well, that happened in my life too. 9/11 is a good example. That happened in my life too. Sure. Where were you on 9/11? That answer is going to change your perspective of that experience. Some kids don't remember it. There are people today who are not alive when 9/11 happened. Okay. You and I had our whole worlds changed that day. And so really think about that. The other thing I really want to highlight, and I want to make sure that I say this before we do finish, is, Gen Z, when I go through the timelines, there's a point in the conversation where I usually make people cry. And it's when I click onto the Gen Z's timeline and I say to them, Gen Z, since they started school, there has been, there's very difficult to get a pin down number, but over 1,400 school shootings. And they have watched it all. They've had a front row seat, and we've been asking them to go to the scariest place on the planet every day. When you and I were in school, there was less than 100. And we didn't know about most of them. We knew about Columbine. We knew about Virginia Tech. So I would say there were 2 in my life. And they grew up knowing this is going to happen all day, every day. They also have a bigger access to technology than we've ever had. Baby boomers would watch the news with their families around the TV, or they'd get a newspaper that was days later. You and I could pick up like the first cable news. Millennials saw the rise of 24-hour cable news, and now Gen Z has it in their pocket. It is constant. And so constant that one day I was reworking my slides, because I always do that. And I was working on the slide that said Gen Z's access to technology. As I'm working on this slide, my son, Gen Z, texts me and says, oh my God, Trump just got shot. And I said, what? And then he sent me a picture and a link to a video. And this was less than 30 minutes after the event occurred. And I thought, whoa. And so that actually, I have a screenshot of our text that I put in the presentation to show just how different it is. Can you imagine if there were over 1,400 school shootings and you found out about it instantly on every network? You could see video. They are not buffered from any of this in any way. And in fact, they're inundated with it all day, every day. I said, how'd you find out? He says, I was playing a video game with my friend and he popped it into Discord. Wow. Can you imagine? The news didn't come interrupt our play, Trace. Nope. We just played.
When you're curious and you stop judging, you see things totally differently. So thank you for sharing that story. Instantly, you can see that, wow, maybe there's a reason the generations are different, and maybe we should ask why.
Yeah, that would be lovely. And I am curious, Trace. I had that question. I pinned it. I didn't forget it. If you don't mind, if I take
Not at
over
all.
interview for just a second. Originally we were going to talk about why I wanted this conversation and what my impact of the panel was. But I've done this several times. And so, I can give you that answer. I think I have. But I'm actually curious to hear from your perspective, what it was like to be a panelist, what that experience was like, and what you took away.
Well, I was honored to be asked to be on the panel, and I'm very proud of my Gen X generation, as you alluded to. But also, I own a company that has every generation that we mentioned working in it. And a lot of things that I would say to you don't work for other generations. Now, I'm well meaning, but it doesn't fall well to who's listening. So anytime I can get better information on how to communicate with somebody that I care about, and I want to make sure that I understand them better and they understand me better, I'm going to take advantage of that. And I have to say, I don't know if I went into the panel with that totally, but I definitely got that. And it was really when Abby was speaking, and she was so courageous with some of the things that she pointed out on that panel. And it made me look at some of the things that I would judge Gen Z for totally differently. And what it did, it allowed me to have a dialogue with my son because I didn't have the words that you just gave the entire Scaling Up Nation, but you opened up that door of curiosity. And that started a conversation. And now I know why. I still don't know how to communicate, and we miscommunicate all the time, but we have conversations about it instead of getting upset with each other or just not being able to understand. Now there's a desire and a curiosity to understand.
I love that. I love that. And I do appreciate you joining. You were really great on the panel. So I appreciate you joining. And that's the takeaway. During the prep interviews, I don't remember if it was Tammy or Athena, but one of the other people, they went away because we talked about punctuation and how people communicate. And at the time, there was going to be another Gen Z person, Piper, and she wasn't able to join us. But when we had the conversation, they were both on the call. And I said to Piper, I said, what does it mean when I use periods and capitals? Because I know I've been hanging out a bit, but most people do not. And she says, oh, it means you're mad at me. And I think it was Athena. And she said, really? And because to us, that's rude, that's poor grammar.
That's
But
right.
realistically, if you're speaking to a young person and you're texting them, and if you use capitals, punctuation, heck, if you put an exclamation in there, you're yelling at them. And so now when I text my son, I try my best to drop my capitals, use those, little acronyms or whatnot. I was joking with him the other day, sent him a bunch of them. He's like, those aren't real, Mom. I thought it was hilarious. But if you can, drop some more emojis in, they actually lean on those social cues. If you don't put a smiley face, they often can walk away. And I'm not saying always, but they can walk away going, they're mad. But if you drop a smiley face, now I know you're not mad. And so we see all their pictures and it looks kind of young and cutesy, but they're actually communicating with emotional intelligence. It's not just a word. It's, I want you to understand where I'm coming from so you don't have to guess. And so I believe it was Athena. She went back to her team and talked to the team and said, is this real? And they said, oh yeah, it seems like you're yelling at us all the time. And they had a great conversation as a team about how we communicate and what it's communicating. And so now if I can gauge the age of the person I'm communicating with, like via email, I'll start to drop some emojis. I'll change my language because I want them to know that I'm happy, I'm friendly, instead of, I'm this very stoic, cranky older person. So if we can really start stepping into the lens of why and what they need and what it means when we say these different things, cats and dogs wag their tails, they mean two different things. And it's same with all of our generations.
It's a great point. I remember my son texted me, I think it was 5 different emojis. I had no idea what he was trying to tell me. So I think I replied back with the laughing smiley face. And he goes, way to be supportive. I have no idea to this day what he was trying to tell me, but that was not the right emoji. So be careful with the emoji that you choose.
Yeah. Throw a GIF in there. They like that too. If you can, share a meme, they're going to appreciate that. It does require us to enter a different world. It really does. I had to learn how to quickly put emojis in. I said to a young person, yeah, that takes time. I have to click on the little smiley and I have to find the smiley. And they said, no, you don't. You have to push shift something. I have to remember again. We'll get there. We'll get there.
If somebody wants to learn more about the work that you do with companies, how should they do that?
Reach out. So my website is resilientroots.com and you can find my email, all my contact information. There's also a sample catalog of conversations that I have had. I'm always open to hearing what the need is and customizing it for organizations. So I would start there, take a look, and reach out.
And we'll make that super easy for the Scaling Up Nation. We'll put all your contact information on the show notes page.
Cool. Thanks, Trace.
I do have a few lightning round questions for you if you're ready for those.
Let's go.
All right. Tiffany, if you could go back in time and talk to your former self on your very first day as a facilitator, what advice would you give yourself?
It's a lesson that it took me a long time to learn, but don't worry about pleasing everybody. You just need an audience of one. If your message lands with one person, that's all you need. And so every time I speak now, and anytime I'm fortunate enough to take the stage, I always just hone my audience into one. And so I need to be me, speak my words, and hopefully impact just one human and trust that that ripple will continue. And here's a great example. I had this webinar and Janice afterwards said, how can we follow up? I said, I'd love a panel. And then I got Trace to come on the panel and I at least impacted one person because you said, come keep talking. And now look, I get to talk to the whole Scaling Up Nation. And so just one person needs to hear your message. You need to connect with one person. Don't put pressure to catch everybody.
Great answer. What are the last few books that you've read?
I saw this on the thing and I was like, oh, Trace, it's weird. So I'm actually currently reading this series, and the last one I finished was it's 17776, and you can do an internet search for this. It's this really cool book that my son sent me, and it's like a electronic novel. And if you click on it, so if you find it, it's like a link to SB Nation, which is like a football site. And I thought, why is my son sending me football? I love football, but he does not. And as you start reading the fake article, that you realize the words on the screen start changing, and then a calendar shows up. And then you read all these different calendars that is this huge timeline of 26 years of these two interspace probes that are talking to one another. And then it dives into the history of football, like in the year 1776. A very good book. I would 10 out of 10 recommend. Before that, I read Kurt Vonnegut's Pity the Reader because I'm currently writing a book, and that was recommended to me by an author friend. Fell in love with that. And then before that, I was reading George Washington's Farewell. So we run the gamut in our book. I've taken a break from reading therapy books or self-help books, and I just needed to dive into some fun passion books.
Got it. When they make a movie about your life, who do you want playing Tiffany?
Oh, what's her name? Jennifer Lawrence. Katniss Everdeen. Jennifer, if you'll be me, that'd be awesome.
There you go. Final question. You now have the power to talk to anybody throughout history. Who would it be with and why?
George Washington. Listen, I came to the Hamilton show way late in life. I found it last January. My Spotify Wrapped playlist is all of the Hamilton soundtrack. And this year I went to Mount Vernon and I went to Williamsburg and I spoke with George Washington for 45 minutes. And now we've booked another trip to go back to Williamsburg for the 4th of July, where I hope to speak to him again. And the why is because he was an incredible leader and human who was shaped by some really incredible events. His perspectives on leadership are very humble and very noble. I know he wasn't all great. There's some history that's not super good, but I think he's probably the best leader our nation has ever had. And I would love to just hear his wisdom, hear his experiences, and chat with him.
Imagine if he said yes to being king.
I don't think he ever would. He didn't want to be president.
Yeah,
He never wanted to be the president.
Very amazing answer. I'm a huge history buff of early American history as well. So we'll have to talk about that on another podcast. But I want to thank you for coming on this one. I think you've inspired a lot of people to look past the differences, to ask some questions, to be curious, and learn in the process so we can all do our jobs a little bit better. Thank you for doing that. Thank you for coming on the Scaling Up H2O podcast.
Thank you so much, Tracy.
Tiffany, once again, it was a pleasure to meet you in person at the Association of Water Technologies conference in Colorado at the Broadmoor. I learned a tremendous amount by being able to ask you questions, and of course, you give tremendous answers. For all of you in the audience that were in the audience when Tiffany did her panel discussion, I was on that panel and I took so much information back from that. The one thing, and I mentioned this in the interview, but I want to underscore it, I got laughs and our Gen Zer got a lot of laughs. And it seemed like people were laughing with me. I was making jokes. I made a joke that a period needs 2 spaces to be proper. And I said it kind of funny and people stood up and cheered. But then when the Gen Z representative would say something, people would laugh as well, but they were more laughing at her answers. And that really spoke to me. And it almost made me feel that I wanted to take back some of the comments that I made in trying to entertain the room, because my intention was not to take anything away from anybody else on the panel. I don't think I did that, but it really allowed me, because that happened, that things that I said perhaps could have set that up, but at the very least, it made me aware that how we proceed in conversations and things we know from our experiences do not translate to everybody. And of course, this sounds like I said this, you heard that. And if you haven't listened to those episodes in a while, I've got 3 of them: episode 117, episode 179, and episode 281, all about how we communicate and how words are so sloppy. And if we understand the temperament of the other person, we can choose better words. Well, along with that, I think if we also understand where that person comes from, how their generation perceives things, they don't have to perceive things the same way that we do in order for them to get the job done. So if we understand that, that's just another level that we can add to our communication, and we can get the right message across. I had that thought when I was up there on the stage, and I was so glad that they invited me to be the Gen Xer representative, because I don't know if I would have come to that conclusion if I weren't actually on stage and people weren't reacting to things that I said. And then observing that similar reaction, but that reaction was much different. People were laughing with me. They were laughing at her answers. And the entire room was probably filled with baby boomers and Gen Xers. So I was able to identify with them without even trying, because we were all in the same generation. Now, with that knowledge, we're able to communicate better. And I will tell you that I understand some of the younger people that I work with a little bit better because of that experience. What I would do in the past is compare people to how I would react. And that's fine if I'm talking about myself, but if I'm talking about somebody else, how are they reacting? Because that's really what you have to deal with. Who cares how you would have reacted in a particular situation that happened to them? It happened to them. So we have to understand why they react a certain way, and then we can help coach them where they're at through their experiences, through their background, because otherwise it doesn't count what you're going to do. Now, maybe we can use some of our experiences to help as we're coaching. And notice I'm using the word coaching. I love that word. I don't like the word managing, because I really think we manage things. We lead people. But how do you really lead people? Well, you lead people in a way that makes people want to follow you. Well, I can't think of another way to get people to want to invest in following you than if you invest in them. And that's what being a coach is all about. So whenever I talk to anybody who is in a management position, I like to change their title to coach from manager, because it really solidifies what that job really entails. I really found interesting how generations truly use different metrics on how they define hard work and success. Older generations often equate it with hours spent, while Gen Zs tie it to alignment to their skills, passions, and values. Well, really, if you look at that, that seems to be all the things that we are trying to instill on this podcast, but yet we don't always look at it that way because it came from the younger generation. Gen Z's formative experiences growing up online, socializing through games and apps, and being part of the indoor generation have reshaped how they communicate and how they experience anxiety. especially in live, unedited conversations. Now, think about that for a second. I text something to somebody and I can think about it for a while. If it's live, whatever comes out, it's out there. And I know all the older people in my generation and above, are thinking, well, hey, that's just how you talk. But if you did not have the same experiences, if you grew up indoors and through COVID when you were in school, think about all the socialization that you got in school. And now think about school is done over technology now. And then during a good part of their formative years, that technology wasn't even in a classroom, it was in their home because they experienced COVID that way. Now, add to all that a male dominated, hustle driven field like industrial water treatment, where we're just taught to ignore emotions and mental health. But that's not sustainable. If we want to attract and keep younger talent, we need to fix these things. And I hope today's interview has helped make the case for exactly why we need to do that. Our industry faces a significant retirement cliff just coming up in the next decade. So many people are starting to retire. And not only are we going to lose all that knowledge, we're going to lose a lot of our workforce. So I urge and encourage you to get some of the information that you have out of your head and make that part of your legacy. You will continue to work in this industry even after you've stopped working in this industry because you have shared that information with the next generation, with the next people that are coming up into this industry. And because of that, they are going to be able to take what you started and make it even better. There's so many people out there that think it's taken me 30 years to amass all this knowledge. It was hard knocks. I had to learn it all myself. I had to read it all myself. They need to do the same thing. Well, you can take that attitude, but let me tell you from firsthand experience, being able to share knowledge that I, from the school of hard knocks, had to figure out myself did teach me a lot in the process. But also being able to share that knowledge and help build a foundation to increase that knowledge with the next generation is the other part of that experience. And I am pleading with everybody out there in the Scaling Up Nation that has knowledge that is going to be retiring in the next 10 to 20 years to please start giving some of that knowledge to somebody that deserves it, that somebody will ask you questions and that somebody will make you better from all the knowledge that you have in your career, because it's the next step of you building a legacy. You built the knowledge. Now you're going to create a foundation for the next generation in the water treatment industry. I love that Tiffany put it, different doesn't mean wrong. Seeing generational differences as strengths rather than flaws can unlock better communication, innovation, resilience, and make it so we have the strongest teams yet. Nation, thank you for listening to this podcast. We're going to have a brand new one for you next Friday. Until then, take care, folks. Lift others as you rise. At the Rising Tide Mastermind, we say a rising tide raises all boats. We believe in the power of helping others to achieve their goals. By supporting your peers, you also grow. Join a group where mutual success is the ultimate goal. To find out more, go to scalinguph2o.com/mastermind. Once again, that's scalinguph2o.com/mastermind.